of the round, this promises to be rich and entertaining, and we still also want to bring forward what ideas and recommendations we can to our constituent bodies in the rounds and the international levels. We have 6 and possibly 7 panellists this afternoon, so we're going to be quite disciplined on timing, and we'll leave significant time for you to take part, and so that we can close sharply at 6 o'clock this evening. No topic's more important to cities than their governance. Without decent governance, we can't effectively manage the growth we want, and it's a policy area in its own right. Citizens demand probity, transparency, inclusion and accountability. But just as big cities are changing, so have our concepts of governance been changing. And I want to touch on a couple of these underlying the metropolitan models that we're looking at, so that we can understand that we in the urban sector really have a lot to do with forming the concepts of governance. When you think about it, the self-managed cities preceded the modern nation state, before colonialism and before the Westphalian state. And when you think of people like Max Weber who theorised the rational, bureaucratic, comprehensive state, we see that behind some of the models of metropolitan governance that see comprehensive general government. And then when you see the critics of that later on, like Robert Dahl's pluralism, we see, again, they were formed in cities, in that case New Haven, where rather he saw the movement of different coalitions and interest groups forming and reforming, a much more fluid matter than that original model. And then also from the cities, we have the Tibu model, the economist, whereby he was really saying these consolidated metropolitan forms of government don't make sense economically. It's much better to have a fragmented set of municipal jurisdictions who are competing for business and competing for firms, and he created that famous model that lay behind forms of governance that followed. And we see some of that emerging around the new governance that's dominant these days. And this new governance, this new institutionalism, came from the neoclassical, and it came from the periods where the states were, modern states were growing too fast, scope getting too wide, and so movements really to yoke the powers of the private sector, or yoke the powers of citizens, yoke the markets to shrink government. Those were the new institutionalism that gave rise to governance as a form of public policy, and that they too came from city models. And so we ought to be very familiar with that, and the institutionalists, we're looking at institutions in the lead, and we have a terrific model today at Barcelona to look and see at that. And now as we rely on much more fluid, contingent, multi-sector, multi-agency forms of government, this kind of network governance that's very fashionable now, in some cases we're seeing the end of that, if you like, messy solutions for messy problems, muddling through. However, it can blur accountability. Citizens can get angry, nobody's in charge. So these new, more distributed forms of network government are really causing some difficulty with accountability and the governability of cities. The hyper-democratic cities that you see in California and places, the ungovernability of cities with high levels of informality. These are all saying maybe network governance isn't the answer after all. And we see, again, the models, say India has adopted, and some people would call that meta-governments. It's about designing and thinking through whole new systems of urban governance in which metro regions are also a part. And so India has been in the lead of really creating some big architecture, and we're seeing that come through now, and we'll see more. So these are all, and Dr. Ravindra's presentation will be looking at the internationalisation of that. This new governance model that we saw develop in countries has now really gone viral internationally. And Metropolis, through its own commissions, the World Bank, the UN Habitat, of course, of other bodies, we see have been promulgating that. There's a little bit of pushback as emerging economies and developing economies don't always like the governance conditions that are laid on them around development assistance. And we see challenges to the universality of some of these human rights-based governance systems which are believed not to be universal but really ought to be particular to each country, and so on. So this is my 5-minute grand tour of some of the concepts of governance that lay behind some of these great case studies today. And so this, we are now going to discuss it here in Hyderabad itself, a very well-known model of metropolitan governance for its inclusiveness, involvement of the private sector and so on. And for that I do thank the India's Administrative Staff College, the preeminent national body in the field, which has kindly coordinated today's session. And this brings us to our distinguished set of panellists. We're going to keep ourselves to 10 minutes each. I'm going to keep track in the old-fashioned way, and we will then give ourselves 30 minutes or so for discussion where we want to crystallise that, and do feel free to bring forward matters that have been already discussed in the governance session that preceded the tea break. And our first speaker, who is in great demand and has been actually double booked for this session, is going to speak first. And Mr. Sundar Bura is very well known to many of you as an eminent advisor for the Society Promotion of Area Resource Centres, always known as SPARC, which is the NGO in the Indian Alliance of SPARC, Mahila Milan and the National Slum Dwellers Federation, which are very important in creating governance systems for the realities of Indian cities. And he's very, very interested in the residential, occupational and social vulnerabilities of the urban poor. And we've heard this as a really critical theme in cities around the world. So Mr. Bora, you're the first to speak to bring us to recommendations around metropolitan governance and what we all should be doing. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the organizers of Metropolis for having invited me to speak. I'm actually going to be speaking about governance, but it may not necessarily be in a metropolitan context. And this presentation is part of an ongoing research study with the Effective States and Inclusive Development Centre at the University of Manchester. And we are working together with them, the organization I used to work for. I'm still an honorary advisor, the Society for Promotion of Area Resource Centres, and some others. And what we took up was a study of the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission in 5 cities of India. Patna in Bihar, Bhopal, Pune, Visakhapatnam and Bhubaneswar. The idea was to look at what is the capacity of the state to address issues of urban poverty. And this presentation gives some findings on the basis of this fieldwork. 2 rounds of field visits have already been done and some are still ongoing. I think everybody knows, I need not labor the point, that in India, rural poverty has been the primary focus. Even the administration has, the bureaucracy, nobody knew much about urban issues, urban administration, urban poverty, in spite of the fact that now 31% of the population is urban. The architecture of governance was laid down. It was being discussed earlier by I think Dr. Janardhan Reddy, the 74th Constitutional Amendment, and In brief, it was the first major urban intervention in independent India, but it was planned as a game changer to incentivize reform for the urban sector and attract private capital. It was very big, it was in 65 cities. There was an urban infrastructure and governance submission which actually accounted for about 70% of the funding, and the basic services for the urban poor for about 30%. The BSUP had in situ redevelopment as the first preference, and relocation were unavoidable. City development plans and detailed project reports were to be prepared, on the basis of which projects were to be sanctioned. Now, what our study is suggesting and has revealed, and I think this is not something that is very original, it has been said before. What happened was that the city development plans and the detailed project reports, all of which were supposed to be prepared in consultation with the community in a participatory manner, for a variety of reasons they all got subcontracted out to consultants. Consultants who actually didn't know anything about the local slum, the local situation, and they parachuted in and parachuted out, and very often the reports that they prepared had almost nothing to do with the reality of that slum, of that urban settlement. And there was an absence of community participation in general. There are honorable exceptions, of course. The other thing is that there seemed to be a disjuncture. I mean, the urban infrastructure and governance part of it didn't seem to have any relationship with poverty issues. A lot of infrastructure was built, whether there were highways or air-conditioned buses procured. It's not at all clear how far that infrastructure helped the poor. The other thing we found was that the issue of giving tenure of land to the urban poor in virtually all the cities we studied has been sort of circumvented. And where the program was taken up, it was where either people owned the land themselves or they'd been resettled there earlier. Which meant that, the whole central issue of land tenure was not handled. In terms of governance, we found that it was a very rigid kind of formula, one size fits all. In all the state governments we visited in the city, they said, why can't the government of India give us some broad guidelines, give us the money and let us do, what we think is right. It was, in brief, over-centralized. There was no provision for cost escalation in the housing component, and so actually some houses remained unbuilt, some houses there was a real serious compromise about what to put into those houses in order to complete them within the budget. There were issues of housing design, how far they accommodated the needs of the poor. There was no provision for transit accommodation. Relocation was undertaken without community participation, and very often people resisted it. In many cities, houses have been built, but they remain unoccupied because there was no people's participation. Those houses are located in places where there's no infrastructure, or there's no transport, there's no education, there's no health. In many cities, this has happened. We found that the urban local bodies had very little institutional capacities to implement this project. There were interstate variations. some high in capacity, the municipalities, some very low. Community participation by and large was not there, but was there in certain. Now, for example, we found that in Andhra, because of a tradition of this community development wings in municipalities, the state capacity was higher, as it was in Pune, but it was very low in Patna, in both terms of capacity and community participation. Actually, it was supposed to be a game changer. It was not supposed to be just another program. It was meant to alter urban governance, attract private capital into infrastructure, but for a variety of reasons it didn't happen. And I think, like many other government programs, the pressure is to spend the money and show the physical targets. So even the reforms got to some extent compromised, even though it was supposed to be a reform-linked, incentive-linked program. So even in those terms, it's questionable how far it worked. I'll end with these three questions. Whether urban local bodies were the right agencies to implement this program in terms of roles and capacities, in spite of the constitutional amendment. But I think the central point that I would like to make of these 3 points is that house construction is not the answer to addressing urban poverty. The number of houses that you can construct, this idea that you must break down the old house, build a new one, is just simply, I think, misplaced. The number of houses you can construct in whatever money you have is an infinitesimally small fraction of what is needed. Perhaps the better policy option would be to spend that money on the universal provision of all basic services like water, sanitation, electricity, pathways, and so on, which are all public goods. And I'll end with this question. I think what we need to do in state agencies and as states, we need to learn how to support what poor people are doing in any case. They are improving their houses incrementally over a period of time. We need to know, we don't know how to do this. But we need to learn from them, and we need to gear up our systems in order to see how we can support the poor in solving their own problems. Thank you. I think I've kept my 10
You
minutes.
have, Mr. Burrow. Thank you very much. But please stay there.
Oh.
Because what I'd like to ask you to do is, in this case alone, let's have a couple of short questions before Mr. Burrow necessarily has to leave. Otherwise, we'll save them up for the general discussion. So the floor is yours. If you could keep them brief, please. Thank you very much.
While agreeing fully with the reflections here, one field observation was some 70-30 or 85-15, whatever. Since many of the municipalities at local level could not match the project got delayed, and also the cost was much. Just like
No, absolutely.
Do you?
No, I agree with what you said.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question before we move on, or comment? I'm sorry, sir. Please go ahead. There's a microphone coming.
It's a simple question. Is this study already publicly available?
No, not yet. Not yet. I must tell you that I sent an article based on this study to 3 newspapers, 2 rejected it, and 1 hasn't replied.
Is there perhaps...
I shouldn't have confessed this, but...
Is there perhaps a progress report or a work in progress that you can refer to for those of us who'd like to see?
Not yet, really.
Not yet. Okay. I would like to say that this is very good grist to our mill, because the very findings of this study can, with not too much difficulty, be turned into recommendations about how the next phase of urban governance and the management of of national intervention programs can work, not just in India but elsewhere if generalised. And of course one of the points really is that it can't always be generalised, that circumstances differ enormously, but nevertheless it was a very good start to our afternoon session. Thank you, Mr. Barra.
Add just one sentence.
Please.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, the whole purpose of our studies are to bring back to those in the government and elsewhere, what are the lessons that we can learn from this in order to make changes in the way we are operating, formulating our policies and programs, so that we can be effective in reaching the poor. That's what I want.
That's what drives it. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you very
bringing us back to that organisation working on sustainability issues. But previously he served as Deputy Chairman of the Karnataka State Planning Board and was Senior Visiting Fellow at the IIM Bangalore and Advisor to the Chief Minister of Karnataka. And I'm sure from time to time you are still the advisor in the Chief Minister's ear. Dr. Ravinder, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. My talk or presentation is centered around one particular metropolitan city or metropolitan region, that is Bangalore in the southern part of India in Karnataka. Now, let me begin with a general question. When we speak about metropolitan governance, what does the word metropolitan denote? I think there is an identity conundrum, as I have put it, because metropolitan cities in India, we refer to a number of entities. We have, when you say Bangalore Metropolis or Hyderabad Metropolitan City, there is the city municipal area, and then there is a metropolitan area, like Huda or DDA or things like that, And there is also a metropolitan region, which is a vast area, which also includes some rural areas, not necessarily the urban. Similarly, multiple authorities govern this metropolitan region. You have the urban local bodies, you have development authorities, a number of parastatals, in charge of various services, water supply board, electricity board, transport, and all that. So I always ask this question: who really governs our cities, our metropolitan cities? Is it the municipality, the mayor, the development authority, or perhaps the state government itself, which has a big role to play? Coming to the Indian context very briefly, as you know, one major factor is that we are urbanizing. This is a well-known thing, and we are expected to reach nearly 600 million, and the number of metropolitan cities is also expected to increase from 53 to 65 by year 2031. But three major developments since 90s is, number one is the economic liberalization, which has had a big impact on cities, particularly the metros, because in a lot of private sector, and particularly the entry of MNCs, has given a different character to metropolitan cities, which is very different from the idea of local bodies. And secondly, this decentralization policy, which is also referred to by Mr. Bura, which is about 74th constitutional amendment, which is supposed to give greater powers to the local bodies. And third is the rise of civil society, number of NGOs and all that, voicing their concerns. Now coming to Bangalore Metropolitan, we have three entities, as I would say. Bangalore, the city proper, which is the municipality, which has recently expanded from about 250 square kilometers to 800. It has a population of 8.4 now, nearly about 9 million. The metropolitan planning area, which is much larger and slightly more population. The metropolitan region that you see is the on the left side. It includes a number of rural areas and smaller local bodies, and to the right, this side you will find the actual metropolitan area. Now, when we talk about metropolitan cities, we always try to, as I said, the question of identity. What is Bangalore identified with? It used to be known as a garden city, some years back, 30, 40, 50 years back, full of gardens. It was called a pensioner's paradise and so on. It is no more so, although there are a number of gardens still. But today, all over the world, it is known as the IT capital of India. It is certainly the knowledge capital, Silicon Valley of India. Almost all MNCs and the major, the IT companies, be it Microsoft or IBM or Cisco, they all have their, shops in Bangalore. And it is when we call it a global city, you may question, because the word global city will have different definitions, world-class city or global city. But nevertheless, I've raised this question about global city because there is a conflict between globalization and localization. When we say, think global and act local, it is not necessarily think global and straight away you can bring those thoughts to the local, because local areas you need to think locally also. So this is the contradiction we face in a city like Bangalore. Now, the major challenges we face, I think Bangalore, since it is known as a global city, it has to compete with global cities, not necessarily Indian cities. So we are looking at competing with it may be Boston or London and San Francisco and so on and so forth, and keeping the edge as the IT capital. But the physical capital is lacking, physical infrastructure and all that, certainly it is poor. We have a lot of environmental problems, social and economic disparities, and of course, I'll come to that institutional character, which is the main theme for my presentation or talk. Just a word about this competitive cities. For instance, the Economist, the benchmarking future cities. In its ranking, in the first 5, you find the expected cities like New York, London, and all. So far as Indian cities are concerned, this is the ranking, and you find Bangalore at 94 in the world competitive cities. But an important point brought out in this report is the strong correlation between the quality of institutions and overall competitiveness. And this is where, of course, as I said, Bangalore also has this economic and social disparities. On the one hand, it is an IT city, it has the highest per capita income, 10,000 plus dollar millionaires are there, we have seen a lot of super rich. But at the same time, problems like lack of affordable housing, low access to public transport, and the water problems and all that. So there is a new governance framework that we have conceived, and when I was earlier advisor to the Chief Minister, we thought of this and prepared a Metropolitan Region Governance Bill, which is to be passed into an act. It has not happened so far. This is the new legislation we have planned, which mainly a new approach to urban planning, regional planning, revitalize the city institutions and the leadership, enhance citizen participation and ensure effective service delivery and accountability, which is one of the most important areas of governance. Now, the main features of the bill, first we want to have an apex planning body. Today, because of the number of planning, there is a lot of overlapping. We have, as I said, a city planning authority, regional planning authority, and so on. So now Metropolitan Planning Committee is to be set up according to the Constitution. That has recently been set up in Bangalore, though not in the way that we had suggested. But we have said that this planning organization should deal with all these aspects. It's not just with spatial planning, which is the case now with master planning. It has to deal with spatial and development planning, which would include land use, transport, housing, infrastructure, everything, and also prepare a capital investment plan and a budget for the entire metropolitan region. At the city level, this is a very important consideration. Today, the local bodies are weak, but they have no autonomy, and so we have recommended that it should have a directly elected mayor for 5 years with political, powers. Today, they don't have powers. So let them have, there is a mayoral committee like a cabinet. That means like a city government. There is also political accountability from the political executive. Today there is no political executive at the city level in India. It is mostly the commissioner and many officers. But at the same time we need decentralization at the ward level. There is a need for a ward level committee. Committee has been set up, but again there are no proper powers have been given. And a neighborhood level area also, there is an area sub-bound, all that. So one of the key things I said is also to ensure transparency and accountability in urban governance. How do we do this? First, we have said all the urban institutions should disclose information voluntarily on all their policies, programs,
Thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to questions on that, what looks as an exemplary approach to metropolitan governance in the Indian setting, and I thank you for that. We're delighted to have Professor Siri joining us for a later slot, and so I'm changing the ground rules for those unlucky participants who are going to follow the last talk, and we're going back to 8 minutes, if that's all right with people, so we have plenty of time for discussion. I do appreciate that our next speaker is very eminent and has a lot to say, but says it very cogently and well. Dr. Ramachandran is former Secretary of the Ministry of Urban Development of the Government of India. Dr. Ramachandran is an eminent former Secretary of the Ministry of Urban Development, and actually I'd be interested to hear what he says about the research results of the first of our presentation, but he's also been at the very lead role of many of the urban and metropolitan reforms in India. Dr. Ramachandran, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor David. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have a presentation, so you'll have to bear with me and with my with my prepared text. Governance improvement is at the top of the agenda in India today. The new central government has highlighted the importance of minimum government, maximum governance. With the process of urbanization proceeding fast and the number of megacities, million-plus population cities, and cities and towns with population of 100,000 or more continuously going up, complexities of sound urban governance are assuming center stage in the country. Just to repeat what you would have read and heard, India today has 43% of its urban population living in 53 cities with population of 1 million or above, and 70% of the total urban population live in 468 cities and towns. While there are 4,041 notified urban bodies, there is another category of 3,894 census towns also, which in effect continue to be rural areas, but the census categorizes them as such towns because more people in such areas are dependent on non-agricultural activities, density is high, and population also is high. This is an added dimension to be kept in view while looking at governance issues in our country. It's also possible that good many of them are adjoining the very large cities, thereby bringing in a new dimension to the concept of metropolitan governance. As India's urban population, I suppose this is working, it's not moving now.
Oh.
I'll be happy, but...
Not moving. Time is not moving.
Can you open the PowerPoint on that laptop there?
Off?
Your paper.
Remove the paper from the platform.
Okay. Now it will work?
No.
I've shut this. It's
Finally,
working.
the chairman will keep track.
So my time starts now.
We'll negotiate that. Please, can somebody help us get that presentation up?
Yeah, it's covered.
As
No, he
India's
doesn't
urban
have-
population is expected to reach a level of 600 million in the next 15 years, and metro cities are to rise from the present 53 to 87, with the share of urban GDP going up from the present level of 55% plus to 75%, while on the one hand the role of big cities particularly become more and more prominent, their governance issues also are getting more and more complex and complicated. Metropolitan areas attract investment, which means additional job creation. So naturally, these comparative advantages of these areas also draw migrants who need jobs and housing, call for better infrastructure and social services, and result in increased congestion, environmental harm, and social problems. As Roy Ball and co-authors point out in their work on financing metropolitan governments, the size of metropolitan areas can either be an economic blessing or a cure, depending on how they are managed. So the critical point is the governance pattern for these areas. We need to take note of the challenges listed in the work I just referred to, such as not only will an increasing number of cities be mega-sized, but also they will be clustered in multi-regions and corridors. In addition to the three existing megacities of Mumbai, New Delhi and Kolkata, Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad and Ahmedabad are to become megacities by the year 2030. This makes regional planning imperative, as is being done in the case of metropolitan areas in India by distinct authorities like the MMRDA in Mumbai, BDA in Bangalore, HMDA in Hyderabad, NCR board in the National Capital Region of Delhi and the surrounding areas. An ADB report on managing Asian cities some years back had drawn attention to the fact that Asian megacities are merging into mega regions, urban settlements on a scale never seen before. Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kyoto, Kobe region was predicted to have 60 million people by the year 2015. Because they span many administrative boundaries, these regional urban systems raise the need for effective coordination of water, transport and communications infrastructure. The observation was that many Asian cities seem to be in crisis. They lack strategic plans to define investments to address their social, economic and environmental issues in an integrated manner. The next point is rising mobility with greatly expanded car ownership will result in declining urban densities and will create challenges for infrastructure, environment and agricultural land use. But in the case of large Indian cities, rather than decline, density is on the increase. And the transport problems are increasingly becoming complex, one of the contributing factors being current master planning models treating transportation as residual. The importance of integration of transport with land use is often emphasized so that in addition to other requirements, provisions for housing for the poor along transit corridors is made. The Indian megacities still do not have established forms of transport coordination systems like the Land Transport Authority in Singapore and Transport for London in London. Only beginnings have been made by providing through separate legislation for a unified Metropolitan Transport Authority for the cities of Hyderabad and Chennai, and through executive mechanisms for cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, Jaipur. Unlike the Transport for London mechanism where the mayor appoints the team who also sets the budget and combining the responsibilities of a department for transport, Department for Public Works, several public transport agencies, a traffic management agency and a local level body that looks after public space, walking and cycling. These entities are headed by either a minister or a senior official in India and are yet to become professionally strong to address the multiplicity of mobility issues of a large city. The third point is with globalization, metro economies are highly integrated in the global economy and will need to be more competitive. In particular, the growth of the largely unregulated and mobile service sector in these metro economies requires smart growth strategy by cities. And here the development of IT services will be a key factor. There is a further challenge today in the context of the central scheme announced to develop 100 new smart cities. What all will this entail? How to strengthen capacities of the city bodies to cope with these new technology requirements and challenges? How to be competitive enough to attract more private investment for this major transformation of the way cities function and deliver. At the core of improvements is in metropolitan governance in India would be revamped cadre structure for the metro city bodies, enhancing capacities to plan, implement, and deliver better, also be able to raise additional resources. Next point is the delivery of adequate services in metropolitan areas should be viewed as part of the smart growth strategy and will be especially challenged by the large population living in slums. Developing cities as smart cities is a prominent agenda item now, and inclusiveness is a primary requirement of this concept. Though universal and equitable access to water as well as access to toilets are issues in the cities, when it comes to households having telephones, 91% in Delhi have this facility, and across urban India, 76% have mobile facility. Now it's a question of converting mobile coverage and actively promoting internet penetration so that advantages of technology are really readily available in civic services to the largest segment of population. The next point is about metropolitan areas will need to be at the forefront of the response to climate change and green growth opportunities. While these key challenges are there before the metropolitan areas of India as well, the complexities of governance in the Indian context are too many. Let me try to list the major ones among these. Though there is no formal definition of a metropolitan city, a metropolitan area is defined in the Constitution as an area having population of 10 lakh, that is 1 million or more, composed in one or more districts and consisting of 2 or more municipalities or panchayats or other contiguous areas specified by the state government. The Census of India defines an urban agglomeration, which essentially means a continuous urban spread comprising of a town or a city and its adjoining outgrowths. Quite often, state governments constitute planning and development entities for the larger metropolitan area, which are mandated to take up spatial planning and infrastructure investments. Thus, the MMRDA for the Mumbai region comprises of 8 municipal corporations, 9 municipal councils, 35 census towns, and 864 villages covering an area of over 4,400 square kilometers.
Sorry for the bell tolls.
Should I stick to the time limit or complete my statement?
Oh, no, round off, please. We're going to run out of money, run out of time at least.
It's possible that these planning bodies cover a mix of jurisdictions. The Hyderabad Metropolitan Development Authority jurisdiction of 7,100 square kilometers covers the jurisdiction of the Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation, entire district of Hyderabad, as well as parts of 3 other adjoining districts. The Chennai Authority has within its area the Chennai Municipal Corporation, 16 municipalities, 1 cantonment board, 20 town panchayats, 46 non-municipal urban units, 12 urban outgrowths and 156 rural areas. These development authorities are chaired by a senior elected functionary higher than the mayor, while the Bangalore and Hyderabad authorities are chaired by the state chief minister. A minister chairs the Mumbai authority. This gives its functioning an entirely different complexion. There is also an entirely different approach to resource generation by such high-profile bodies, especially when they happen to be the capital area of the state. In the case of many other metro cities, including those covering capital cities, generally senior officials chair these bodies and normally act as an additional source of generating resources and taking up projects beyond the normal jurisdiction of the elected municipal bodies. There is also a constitutional provision to have a metropolitan planning committee for areas having a population of 10 lakh or more, mainly mandated to prepare draft development plan for the area. But these committees have neither been mandated with sufficient powers, nor do they succeed in playing an effective role insofar as the limited mandate given is concerned. Though basic services like water supply, solid waste management are mandated for the urban local bodies, the emergence of parastatal organizations like the water boards and dual jurisdiction of the state departments as well as these city level bodies have resulted in confusion. When jurisdictions of these bodies are limited to municipal limits, planning and taking up works in the immediately adjoining area of such bodies quite often becomes a casualty. Multiplicity of administrative and governance jurisdictions, multiplicity of legislation.
I'm sorry, Dr. We'll need to finish. What you might see as time there is all gone. If you could round it off, it'd be great.
Multiplicity of service providers, multiplicity in planning, and multiple territorial jurisdictions, while on the one hand can be argued to be a necessity and a facilitative arrangement, at the same time it leads to certain amount of confusion as far as overall integrated planning, development, raising of resources, and appropriate service delivery is concerned. I'll leave the question to be answered by you as to what form of metropolitan governance. Thank you.
I apologize. apologise that we have to be short today and we have left hanging in the air the critical questions. So perhaps in the discussion we might be able to come back to you with the critical answer.
Also on Mr. Bura's point, I'll come back later if there is time.
We'd be delighted to hear your response to Mr. Bura too, and thank you very much indeed for that. And we're now going to ask our representative from the World Bank, Mr. Bajor Mehta, who's well known to many of you, who's the lead urban specialist of the bank, and he will be looking at the Metro Lab that the World Bank has been working with, and he's a distinguished professional practitioner of many years, and we appreciate your joining us today. Thank you.
I'll stay within 10 minutes, if
Oh, well,
possible.
we're looking at
within
8 minutes.
8 minutes, I'll stay within 5 minutes if you want.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, one of the things that we wanted to come to this presentation was with a particular platform that has started to develop over the last 2.5 years. And this is not a prescription, because generally speaking, people tend to dump this on us that the World Bank prescribes this. This is not a prescription, this is a platform that anybody can use. So please, this is also an invitation for collaboration. What we have been doing, I will introduce you in a very brief way the urban sector within the World Bank Group and the strategic business plan for the urban sector, but focus my presentation on the global lab on metropolitan strategic planning. We realized we have been working over 120 countries. This is the map of where our investments are, where our basic focus is on. As you can see, it's mostly on East Asia, South Asia, some of it in the Middle East and North Africa, and a lot in Latin America. This reflects our client base, this reflects our government, our ownership base, because we are a cooperative bank of sorts. And the strategic business plan for the urban sector, in a very brief way, is that we believe that we need to plan, connect, and finance. This is the World Bank's strategic plan. So in a sense, we've realized that in the past, a lot of the emphasis was on the financing side of it. And we realized that without the planning and without the connecting between different cities and inside cities and between cities, we've been seeing a series of not so successful investments, or the financing has not been so successfully implemented and hasn't been as productive as it could have been. So in a sense, the strategic directions that we are now basically looking at in the business lines that we have developed are cities and economic growth. And so we have a large program coming up from our doing business side, which is essentially cities and economic growth, reducing urban poverty, urban environment and climate change, and disaster management, because we realize that most of the disasters, the costliest disasters are urban disasters most of the time, and urban land, housing and planning, and city management and subnational finance. These are the areas in which the bank group is now going forward working on. So in that sense, what we have are, I won't go through all of these, but we've followed also the global trends, is that we've had programs on green cities, inclusive cities, resilient cities, and competitive cities. But all of these are basically tags, and these are essentially areas in which we could have planning, we could have the connections, and we could have the financing. But essentially the focus now, going forward, even within the bank, which used to reflect the government's views, like the government of India, that, the world is rural, so therefore the urban sector was not important. This is changing even within the World Bank. You might not realize it, but people like me who work within the World Bank's urban sector, we've had a major struggle for the last many, many years to find attention at the highest levels of the World Bank Group, and that is changing. And so that, for us, that is a very welcome change. Now, to address that, we've basically set up what is called a global lab on metropolitan strategic planning. This came about because of, I won't go through this slide, this is how the metropolitan regions are increasing, and their emphasis, and around the world, this is where the action in going forward is. So therefore, and we believe that just to be smart, you don't need to divide the city. It's not either or. It's not a city for the poor or a city for the rich. It's a city for everybody. And how does one make that happen? And we also realize that cities essentially need to learn from each other. The best teachers of cities are other cities. And it's that in that platform, it's not prescription from the World Bank, it's not advice from somewhere else, it's not parachuting in and saying what works, but how one city tells the other city, this is what we did under our circumstances and this is what happened. So essentially, to improve living conditions, managing the physical form, creating jobs, expanding the coverage and quality of basic infrastructure services, and bridging the divided city and fostering inclusion, and at the same time building resilient cities required a different way of learning rather than a classroom-based learning. Practitioners, senior practitioners don't really learn from training programs or from workshops, but they learn from while they actually do things. And so therefore we realized that there was a global need for sharing of knowledge, that this knowledge needed to be shared. And that for that, the leadership commitments had to be there, the institutional innovations had to be there, and the learning and experimentation within a safe environment. When equals meet together and share an experience, they do not ridicule each other. They realize why somebody made a mistake because they have made the same mistake in the past themselves. And so therefore we wanted to provide a safe working ideas exchange program. So essentially, the objectives of the program were to promote the sharing of knowledge, facilitating capacity building and peer learning, and fostering a network of practitioners and providing as a platform to help each other. We did not have a criteria and said which are the cities that need to be. We thought that we would start, and as we went forward, other cities would see this work and they would want, if they liked it, they would want to be participating in it. So therefore it's an open program, it's not by invitation only. We believe that as word spreads, more other cities might want to join us. So in the sense, at the moment, the participating cities are Sao Paulo, Rio, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Metro Manila, Ho Chi Minh, Addis Ababa, Nairobi, Accra, Dar es Salaam, Mumbai, Karachi and Kathmandu, Barcelona, New York, Paris and Seoul. So these are the cities that are participating actively. And it is actually it's a work in progress. The contents of the program are essentially simple, that it's a network of practitioners and the creation of a virtual network. We do a metropolitan strategic planning exchange. Now these are living laboratories, and it started in New York with the Regional Planning Association of New York, which is a very well-known, well-established, long-standing association which wanted to come and do this. And they conducted a large, so all of these cities meet in one place, they discuss other areas. And the themes have been metropolitan strategic planning, city data and institutional frameworks, essentially all the metropolitan functions that are supposed to be there. In the last one, Mumbai volunteered to share its draft regional development plan with the rest of the cities. So all these cities came together in Mumbai in December last year, and they provided feedback to Mumbai in its regional plan. This was very highly appreciated by Mumbai because it got practitioners to tell them from around the world, these are the mistakes we have made, don't do this. These are the things that they've took back to their own cities. And they also met in Seoul in May of this year, where they brought together thinking outside the boundaries and learning from Seoul. And now in November, we will be meeting in Dar es Salaam to do more or less the same thing, as Dar es Salaam is probably the fastest in sub-Saharan Africa, the fastest growing city there. And the next steps are that we would have a lab in Paris and another lab in Latin America in 2015, and a new generation of leadership learning and innovation as we go forward. And those of you who are from any metropolitan area and you feel that you would like to participate, please, you're welcome. Thank you. I went over 10 minutes.
No, thank you very much. You find it. It's very important that we take from that the prospect of transmitting experience around metro governance through that mechanism. So I'd really encourage cities to join if you haven't joined and take part. I also learnt from that presentation and Dr. Ramachandran's presentation that smart cities are inclusive cities and inclusive cities are smart cities. They're not different things. That smart cities are not high-tech cities on the hill. There are lots and lots of people using mobile phones for e-governance and the rest of it. And so that's a breakthrough in my thinking, and I suggest that we go that way when we're thinking about what more actions might come. I apologise to Professor Siri before but your turn has come, and do please join the table of gentlemen to present your really most interesting look at the whole. I'm just getting my notes together here. Professor Siri's Professor of Urban Planning at HSBC and has been very active, and we're now looking at one of the most extraordinary metro regions for metro governance, Cairo in Egypt, and she's the Professor of Urban Planning and Researcher there, and currently Director of the Regional Branch of Metropolis for Africa and the Middle East, and so has a great role in the conference and the organisation itself. Thank you, Professor Siri.
Thank you. It's good that I come after a background has been laid for me. That I hear from my previous professor, there is something called Metropolitan Revolution, and there is another guy from who told us about the Metropolitan Lab and resilience. So I'm going to speak about my country, and if you have heard that Egypt has been had a revolution 3 years ago, and so we are suffering from a series of problems that I limited into 2 questions. What happens when a revolution or a country is changing its status from a dictatorship into trying to be more liberal? During this period of the last 3 years, we thought it's going to be like 2 years and everything is going to be democratic and the country is going to be changing into...
Just
so
1 minute to go and come back.
The citizens have gained a lot of power. They are in the streets. Everybody thinks after the revolution, the government is not like very weak. Everybody wants to do everything as he likes. So how can governance deal with this problem? They have gained collective power and trying to say that we own the city. The city is ours. We want to change. If I want to be a vendor and put my kiosk here and sell things, I will do it. If you want to build a house here, I will go and build on agricultural land. If I do so we thought it was going to be for 1 year, but now we have been there for 3 years. I think many of the Arab countries and the so-called Spring Revolution countries are suffering from the same thing, is that citizens think we have the right to the city. So what do the administration of the city do? So I'm coming here to get the advice of the most democratic country in India. What do we do to get Egypt into the right state? It's some kind of history, and also I would like to mention that Egypt now is 2/3 of the Egyptians are young people. So young people are more have more enthusiasm and power, and also we are a very poor country. About 40% of our population is poor. The physical state of many of the cities, especially Cairo and Alexandria, the big countries, is people decided to occupy the streets, the path, park the cars, whatever they like, have minibus, and even introducing the tuk-tuk in every street, which we didn't have before the revolution. We only had cars and so on. The edge of the city is not clear because everybody builds on... So we are having a city of contrast. A city is official city with official boundaries, and then we have the other city. It existed before the revolution, but after the revolution, it's like twice or 3 times in dictatorship. In Mubarak's era, we were having very nice projects, very nice plazas, very nice schools, and we have also the shadow city of informal areas, but it was limited. Now the boundaries is unlimited. People are now having like community mobilization. We have now a different form of representation. People are not looking for elections. They are looking, we are the leaders of the city. Like I think some person said, we are looking for new leaders. We have now new leaders in the city. But how come the official administration can deal with the leaders in the street? What is the relation? How can we, the number of violations, 2.5 times the number of violations that existed. That is the building without license, building exceeding the heights, exceeding the building laws, and so on. Is during the first year and a half, we can have some kind of statistics that 2.5% more violation. That's in Cairo. I think in Alexandria also the same thing. And if we look into it, all the countries of the Arab Spring is suffering from. If the government is very weak, then the people take things into their hand. What about governance in this? Usually when we look about saying, how do we deal with risk? We think about tornadoes or floods or so on. But are you thinking of revolutions? What happens if a country is suffering from a revolution? What do the governance do? So I'm raising the question and waiting for your answer. If I am a mayor of Cairo, what do I do during this period of turbulence? I think it's a hard question, because we see a lot of pictures is people going into the streets and occupying the streets that there is no place for a car to move. And then the last project is that they try to relocate the vendors from the streets and try to find, I think it's the pictures down, this pictures, is they trying to remove them from the main streets and trying to subdivide an area with the lines on the ground and make people, each one take a square, 2 by 2 square meter place for them to put their merchants and so on. So, but people are also taking this and then coming back to the same area. On that side, we have a vision of the government of making Cairo. We have a vision called 2050. What is going to happen in Cairo in year 2050? The vision of making, so this is the Nile. It's a vision of making the waterfront of the Nile in Cairo like Dubai. And this is the reality. And this is how many people are going to remove. This might be accepted in a dictatorship, but during this time it's very difficult to deal with project of how to deal with people in the streets and relocating people and so on. So I would like very much to raise the question of the transition period. Dictatorship, you know how to deal with the people and how to deal with, which is very difficult. Democratic, like maybe India, is very easy to have like informal areas grouping together and having a say and participation in budget. But what about the period in between being a dictatorship and turning into complete democratic? The roles and responsibilities are not very clear now. The street vendors and people are doing whatever they like. The government is very weak. The relocation practice is very difficult to relocate anybody now because it's a hot issue. It's very difficult to deal with all the the problems that come with not having too much money because of also because of security, because if you hear the news, there is a lot of security problems. Some questions that I raise was, main problem is the newest government in Egypt. Will they still leave the public space for the people? Will there still be freedom? Will there still be democracy? Are they going to turn us into go back? Are we going to go back? Is it easier to go back? Is it easier to go back than to go to deal with this period and then become democratic? Or is it easier to go back into being either chaos or dictatorship. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aziz. How often in our professional lives do we see a presentation so hot from the embers of change, so broad in presentation of what the task is, and so open to us to make suggestions around what that transition and what that metro governance is? We're going to hold the discussion, if you can stand it, and go to our next speaker. We have two more speakers, and then we have a number of quite important matters to discuss. So I'd really please ask you to do stay on for the discussion, and I promise you we'll finish by 6. It's hard to imagine this and the unanswered questions of India in metro governance being more interesting, and we are now going also to look at the metro region of Barcelona, which is home to Metropolis, and Mr. Ramon Torra y Chicoy is the General Manager of the Metropolitan Region of Barcelona, a most interesting city under change itself. And we'd like you to take us through. Please be prepared because in this case it's Spanish, one of the international language, but it might just as easily be in Catalan.
Thank you very much. I am Ramon Torra. Mr. Balmont is a problem of governance in his municipality in Cornellà de Llobregat. These days he's in Hyderabad, but today is another problem. Yo no haré la presentación con PowerPoint. No haré la broma de que o tienes algo que decir o pasas un PowerPoint. Yo, en principio, tengo algo que decir, ¿no? Nosotros la experiencia en el área metropolitana de Barcelona deriva de una situación que es, digamos que es global, que es la importancia que están adquiriendo las ciudades y los territorios metropolitanos en el ámbito global. Es un hecho contrastado y es bien cierto que las dinámicas que lo impulsan están presentes de forma más acusada en las grandes ciudades de Asia o América. Su desarrollo es más acelerado, los cambios son más importantes, las desigualdades más radicales, ¿no? Eso se traduce para estos territorios metropolitanos en retos importantes, como la construcción de infraestructuras, el planeamiento urbanístico, la ordenación del territorio, la política de vivienda, pero también en características muy positivas como el dinamismo social y económico. Las transformaciones que están atravesando sobre todo las ciudades de Asia y América así lo ponen de manifiesto. Retos como los que ya se han indicado aquí requieren de modelos de gobernanza, de nuevas formas para la toma de decisiones coordinada y que garantice la coherencia de la política pública en las grandes aglomeraciones urbanas. Miren, yo como director general del área metropolitana de Barcelona quiero compartir con ustedes brevemente nuestra experiencia en el ámbito de la gobernanza. Está claro que en entornos metropolitanos como el de Barcelona y el de ciudades como la que nos acoge, como en Hyderabad, hay diferencias profundas, pero parto de la base de que el fenómeno metropolitano comparte elementos y dinámicas y retos comunes, como el de la gobernanza en entornos institucionales fragmentados, por no ir más lejos. Algunos de los retos a los que se enfrentan estos entornos metropolitanos son compartidos y principalmente podríamos citar las políticas para promover la cohesión social y el bienestar social de los ciudadanos, las estrategias para garantizar el desarrollo sostenible y la actividad económica y los equilibrios medioambientales y territoriales que eviten la expansión indefinida de la ciudad y el agotamiento de los bienes ecológicos, que son, en definitiva, la garantía de bienestar social y económico de las futuras generaciones. En este sentido, en Europa somos cada vez más conscientes de que los retos a los que nos enfrentamos pasan por reforzar el rol que los entornos metropolitanos desempeñan en la creación de riqueza y en la competitividad. Esto se observa, por ejemplo, en los cambios que países como Francia e Italia están impulsando en la configuración territorial a través de la creación de nuevas instituciones metropolitanas. Su cambio institucional en el ámbito local tiene una dirección muy clara en la creación de nuevas instituciones metropolitanas o en la reorientación que la Unión Europea está dando a muchas de sus políticas en las que se habla de ciudades y regiones metropolitanas, no solo desde el punto de vista territorial, sino como en ámbitos como el cambio climático, el empleo, la energía, etc. Y destina parte de sus fondos tanto para ciudades europeas como para ciudades de otras regiones del mundo. Yendo al caso del área metropolitana de Barcelona, la colaboración entre los distintos actores y municipios del área metropolitana hace años que en lo que se puede considerarse como la base del modelo de gobernanza metropolitana. Es la colaboración entre los distintos actores y municipios la que impulsa la creación de esta área metropolitana, que desembocó en el año 2010 en la aprobación por parte del Parlamento de Cataluña de la ley de creación de esta nueva institución metropolitana. Nueva institución con una vieja historia, tal como estamos diciendo, que es esta colaboración ya antigua que ha llevado a la reinstitucionalización del área metropolitana. El entorno de Barcelona es un territorio relativamente pequeño si lo comparamos con otras grandes ciudades del mundo, pero posee algunas características esencialmente metropolitanas, que requieren de un modelo de gestión específico. Ocupa un territorio de 630 kilómetros cuadrados, en el que viven 3,5 millones de personas, lo que lo convierte en la tercera área metropolitana europea en cuanto a densidad demográfica. Es una ciudad metropolitana con una densidad de 5.000 habitantes por kilómetro cuadrado. Estamos hablando de una ciudad densa, muy densa. En el territorio que cooperan y conviven 36 municipios con un considerable grado de autonomía y con una personalidad histórica y un arraigo social muy marcado. Los ciudadanos se sienten también muy identificados con su municipio. En este territorio se genera más del 50% del Producto Interior Bruto de Cataluña, que tiene 7,5 millones de habitantes, lo que nos da la medida de la concentración de actividad económica e industrial que se produce en el territorio. Intentaré ir más rápido. Por otra parte, el nivel infraestructural alberga concentraciones de infraestructuras altas, aeropuertos, puertos, etc. Todo esto en un territorio en el que el 52% de su superficie es suelo de espacios naturales o espacios libres territoriales, suelos forestales, playas, ríos, agrícolas. Por tanto, una densidad aún mayor sobre el espacio que se ocupa. Todo esto pueden convertirse en factores de competitividad, pero vienen a reforzar o marcar la complejidad y la interdependencia que necesita y que se genera en este territorio, para poder hacer de ellos elementos multiplicadores de bienestar y de calidad de vida. Por todo esto, los 36 municipios metropolitanos entendemos la necesidad de coordinarnos antes de que existiese ningún marco institucional que lo hiciera posible. Esto se consiguió a través de acuerdos con alcaldes, agentes económicos, sociales, etc. Finalmente, tal como he dicho, el Parlamento de Cataluña aprobó la ley de creación del área metropolitana de Barcelona, que gestiona la gran realidad metropolitana, la gran ciudad metropolitana, en lo que atañe a políticas de urbanismo, movilidad y transporte, medio ambiente, infraestructuras y promoción económica. Esta es una administración de elección indirecta, en que están representadas todos los alcaldes, los 36 alcaldes. La preside Xavier Trias, alcalde de Barcelona. Es una administración de carácter supramunicipal, no sustituimos a los municipios y, por tanto, se ha creado para impulsar políticas para generar consensos con el resto de administraciones y actores sociales. Sin contar con los servicios de transporte público, es una administración que tiene un presupuesto de 600 millones de euros. Si la consolidamos con las empresas públicas propiedad de esta administración, hablaríamos de 1.500 millones de euros. Es cierto que la diferencia de dimensión de los retos a que se ha de hacer frente las grandes metrópolis asiáticas o americanas somos distintos, pero hace 40 años que el entorno metropolitano de Barcelona también tuvo que encarar retos de primer orden en la articulación de una visión metropolitana que ayudó a resolverlos con éxito, por ejemplo, en lo que atañe a la carencia de infraestructuras básicas, el aumento de población o a la necesidad de reactivación industrial y económica. Bueno, iré al final. Todo esto requiere de pedagogía y liderazgo. Los contextos institucionales de nuestras ciudades serán diferentes, pero la complejidad que caracteriza a la ciudad metropolitana y a la multiplicidad de actores requiere de estrategias para construir acuerdos, y esto requiere pedagogía y liderazgo, tal como he dicho, por parte de los actores metropolitanos, especialmente los agentes políticos, que es la responsabilidad que tienen, el liderazgo social y la capacidad para extender el apoyo a una visión integral de la ciudad metropolitana en la que concurren el resto de administraciones y actores y en beneficio de todos. Muchas gracias por su atención y si después quieren hacer alguna pregunta les atenderé muy amablemente.
Thank you very much. We're all under terrible pressure for time, so I appreciate that, and we still want some discussion, so do hang in there. We have one last but not least presentation from Dr. Ravindra Prasad, who's the Senior Advisor at the Administrative Staff College of India, our host this afternoon. He's been a senior advisor in that area since 2005, and with 4 decades of experience in the field, which he will crystallise in 8 minutes at the most, and then we'll have some discussion. And I do apologise for the time shortages.
Watchdog David, I'll try to complete much earlier. Well, I think much of what we want to do, my presentation has been discussed by Mr. Ravindra and Ramchandran, and therefore I would like to avoid whatever is being discussed. So now, the number of metros in India, their contribution, however they live, has already been discussed. Now, in the metropolitan areas, there is an institutional multiplicity that has already been discussed by earlier panelists, and we find a large number of agencies which govern the city, but though there is no coordination between them, there is no accountability of these institutions. Between them, there is a conflicts and confrontations sometimes between these multiplicity of institutions, and they're not empowered, and their accountability is to the state governments rather than to the local community or local bodies. You look at the list of agencies which work on the city government, and this accountability is practically do not exist. Now, if you find the issues are basically lack of clear democratic accountability. The institutions have evolved over time based on conflicts and contingencies, and those institutions have been institutionalized over time, and therefore there's a problem. And mayors in Indian cities are ceremonial; they do not have any powers, and therefore, problems are how to increase participation of the community, how to achieve convergence between local governments, state governments, and national governments, and this is within a political turf, and nobody would like to take into cognizance. Now, civil societies are emerging in almost all cities, not only metro cities but also other cities, but they are demanding transparency and accountability and participation, but there has been a resistance towards providing a space, political space for the civil society, both by the state governments and local governments. Those central government or national government is probably willing to guide the state governments. Now, another problem is the cities, metro cities, or what we may call, are growing outside the cities, and the demand for services from the parent city is increasing across in the country, and thereby creating problems. Now, issues here are absence of institutional consensus. If there are 10 or 15 institutions within a state, within a city, between them there is no joint action, there is no consensus. And each of these institutions have their own vision, their own perspective, their own plan of action, and therefore there is a conflict between these institutions. Now, there are also many legal restrictions within which these multiplicity of institutions work, and they are not able to deliver because of legal restrictions. Now, there are many challenges which have been discussed. Public transport, as earlier somebody put it, panelists put it, only 20% or 25%, thereby creating more problems within the city. Now, 74th Amendment Act has provided for revamping the system by providing a Metropolitan Planning Committee, but to the best of my knowledge, in no city, no metropolitan city, the Metropolitan Planning Committee is functioning effectively. It is expected to provide innovative forms of metropolitan government, but they have not been able to do it. Well, JNRM, about which we have talked quite often since morning, has created some more institutions, but more of these institutions are more in form than in reality. They are in substance. Now, the metropolitan government requires a democratic institutional forum. Probably, I was thinking of a Greater London Authority, where the Greater London Authority has an elected mayor with power and an assembly of 25 or 30 members who will govern them, while the City of London and other agencies still continue to work. And we also looking for in a metropolitan government is an effective citizen participation, which is missing in the present context. And an empowered mayor is more important anywhere in the world. An effective city, effectively managed city, is having an elected mayor, an empowered mayor. But unfortunately, in Indian cities, in most cases, they are not elected mayors. Even when they are elected, they are not empowered. They do not have. One more important problem in metropolitan government is they have to interact with the different sectors, with the different actors, and with the different processes. Now, that interactive process, the cities are not capable of. The metropolitan institutions, number of institutions that are there, they are not able to do it, and therefore the problems create. Now, the question is, capacity building or metropolitan governance involves, or any city governance involves three important factors. That one is the human resources, the second is organizational system structures, and institutional and legal framework. Unless these three components of capacities or institutional capacities are developed, it is impossible for metropolitan governance to deliver. But unfortunately, we are not taking care of these three things, and therefore the problems crop up. I'll close it by saying that Tocqueville said, for forms of government, let fools context. But whichever is best administered is the best form of government. And we are still looking for a best form of metropolitan government which can deliver to the community with participation. But unfortunately, we are still groping. Thank you.
Dr. Prasad, what a fantastic compressed presentation. I congratulate you, and I'm sorry we're giving ourselves 5 more minutes now for completing our agenda today, and we will finish at 6 as promised. So we do need to compress our comments and discussion as well, if we may. But could we please perhaps start with Cairo and Barcelona, and we'll spend half the time on that, and then we'll come back to the questions unresolved in the vastness of India. Both those discussions, I think, are going to spill over into our discussions later, but we're going to finish at 6. So the floor is open. First, for the non-Indian contributions this afternoon. Are there questions and comments? And please, suggestions over what a transitional model in Cairo might be, and comments on the Barcelona creation of the new regionalism there. Is there anything there, please?
Good evening to all. My name is P. Narasimha Rao, representing an organization, namely Urban Development Research Institute located at Hyderabad. Mine is not a question, but rather a comment on the presentation which was made by Mr. Barjor Mehta of World Bank. So, he told that teachers of a city happen to be the other cities. Best teachers of a city happen to be the other cities. From other cities we can learn, one city can learn many things from the other cities. This aspect we have noted it with utmost pride and dignity. We wish to congratulate him for having made this statement.
Thank you.
Perhaps I would like to repeat it.
Yes.
The teachers of a city happen to be the other cities. In the sense, one city can learn many things from the other cities.
Do you?
No, he left.
Oh, yes. I think.
But you can comment.
There is a rich pattern that we can follow up later over cities that systematically learn from other cities, and it's exploding around the world. Tim Campbell's just written a book on it. There are some tremendous patterns, and I commend it to you in India. You have a lot to teach the world as well as learn from. Thank you. More. Yes, please.
Hi, I have three short questions and a comment for Professor Siri. My question is, in India, what we have today is there is an absence of data sets as to how many people live where, especially with regards to slums and the urban poor. So the kind of information relays that are required for efficient governance, they are completely absent in India today. So what happens is that, like in cases like Delhi, they have invented an aesthetic rule to govern, which is the idea that like if it looks illegal, it is illegal. So that is one question. So what kind of programs do we have to effectively enumerate the number of slum dwellers and the legalities of their existence and so on? That is one question. Second question is, on the one side we have this whole talk about decentralization and people's participation and so on, and also parallelly there's also this talk about how we have splintered kinds of institutions, so that on one hand we want a supreme kind of all-encompassing planning body at the level of cities, and on the other side we are talking about participation. So where does this leave the question of urban democracy and right to city and so on? The third question is, since Dr. Ramchandran is here, what does it actually mean to have a smart city? I mean, today we have this whole talk about 100 smart cities and so on, but what does it actually mean? I've been trying for the last 3 months to find out what smart cities actually mean. Does it mean that we are going to give the urban governance to some kind of experts, and there's going to be a technologization of urban governance? So in that case, where does the whole participatory thing stand? And to Professor Siri, I think last short comment. I think like the real idea to move forward is not to look at it as anarchy, but to look at it as empowerment of people generally. You know, because like in India, it just takes in fact, there was this retired army major who went on an evening walk and he was pissed off that there were so many street dwellers. He just shot a letter to the Supreme Court Chief Justice, and he wrote back, the Chief Justice wrote back to the High Court judge, and then we have a massive eviction of pavement dwellers and street vendors. So I think instead of looking at it as an anarchy, I think the idea is to look at it as empowerment and more democracy. Thank you.
Could you, just a very quick answer if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much.
Well, I think you're talking about database, and that's the problem. So I don't have to comment more further on that, because the census 2011 has worked out data on slums, and 2,000 out of the 4,000 cities, urban local municipalities, only 2,500 has reported they have slums, which means 1,400 local bodies do not have slums. I cannot believe it. Therefore, it's a question of data. That problem is there. Therefore, government of Telangana has started a survey where recently probably we can hope to get something out of that. The second is decentralization and splintered. Well, decentralization is in form. The government's resistance to decentralize is a reality. So I can't go beyond that.
Thanks very much. Any further? 1, 2. Please, very brief, please.
Good evening. I am Murli Manohar from Deputy General Manager from Singareni Coal Mines. But I want to address Syria. She wanted one session. I will give you one practical example. The Singareni Coal Mines in South India was losing heavily, even paying wages for very difficult. One great leader has come, H.P. Sharma, IAS officer. He has seen this situation. What he did, he means utilize the training department very well, from grassroots level and from coal fields to directors. He has educated people and taken the problems to them and asked the solution from them. Within a 1.5 year, it has turned into profits. What I request, Sira, it is there are intellectuals in our country, there are professionals in your this thing, philosophers in this thing. Utilize their services, try to educate from the grassroots level to top level. Things will change. Thank you.
Thank you for the hopeful comment. Would you wish to comment on it or respond?
Yes, I can give one response. I can understand the common comment is for street vendors. You can speak with street vendors and try to be more participatory. But if a person builds a building that is unsafe, or if a building is outside the legal permit, how can I negotiate? Yeah, okay.
We had very volatile people from coal fields. They are illiterate. They have gone to their consensus. They have gone to their hearts. They have changed their attitude and they made changes.
Thank you. We've got one more question and then we're going to close. Okay, so let's fill that agenda first, but keep it brief.
Actually, it is Chari who should speak on smart cities. He is disappearing.
There is a session tomorrow on smart cities as well.
Yeah.
But you've got a 20-second response if you'd like to make it. Please.
It's not possible to respond in 20 seconds.
Oh, so, well, I'm just thinking we're past 6 now.
Yes, my question to Ravindra Garu.
Okay.
So my question is on, can you elaborate about composition of Metropolitan Planning Committee in Bangalore? And is the committee is elected or nominated or co-opted?
Well, see, the Metropolitan Planning Committee has just been announced by the government. And that is, according to that, the Chief Minister will be the chairperson of the Metropolitan Planning Committee. Then the Minister for Urban Development will be a member. Some of the secretaries, urban development, finance, etc. But the important thing is that members from the local bodies, say the Bangalore Municipal Corporation and some of the smaller municipalities, they will elect representatives who will sit on the Metropolitan Planning Committee from the municipality. Because even according to the Constitution, 2/3 have to be from the elected representatives, and 1/3 will be, the nominated, some experts and all that. That is the composition as of now.
I promised I'd finished at 6. We've gone a little over. I apologise for that. I thank you all for not only staying the part, but responding enthusiastically and joining a terrific panel. And I do apologise to the panel itself for having to confine it in such a short time. And we live on tomorrow. We have several more days. And do reflect on this and bring it forward in other sessions so as to get our ideas. And I would have liked some more discussion on Cairo. We've had a tremendous exposure of some of the big issues in India and the World Bank's lab, and a quick look at Barcelona as well. So there's a lot of rich material that we shouldn't lose sight of as the conference proceeds. Thank you to the panel, thank you to the interpreters, and thank you to the Staff College for sponsoring this afternoon.
Thank you, David.